Hello students. In the second module of sampling methods, I'm going to discuss about the two important sampling methods. They are probability sampling methods and non-probability methods. So let's first understand what is probability sampling method. The probability sampling is a sampling technique in which the sample from a larger population are chosen using a method based on the theory of probability. Here, every unit of the population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. And here, the sampling procedure is based on the mathematical decision, so which leaves no discretion to the researcher, and one can estimate in advance about the chance or the probability of the sample unit that to be selected. So in case of probability sampling, the first thing is that every unit of the population has an equal chance, and secondly, the selection of the specific unit in the sample depends entirely on the chance or probability. So here again there is non-probability sampling. Now in case of non-probability sampling, it is a sampling technique in which the researcher selects sample based on the subjective judgment of the researcher rather than the random selection. And in this sampling method, the probability of each item in the universe to get selected for research is not the same. So, the sample collected through this method is not random in nature. So that's why it is known as non-random sampling. So this method depends entirely on the expertise of the researcher, and it is carried out by observation, and the researcher use this method mostly for qualitative research. So let's first try to understand the different probability or random sampling methods. So the random sampling methods are simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, area sampling, and multi-stage sampling. So let's start with first one, that is simple random sampling. So the simple random sampling is the simplest type of probability sampling, and the most fundamental feature of this method is that each sample element has an equal chance of being selected. And this sample is generally done by lottery method or random numbers. So just try to understand that how we do the simple random sample. First, we need to select a sampling frame, right? So from that sample frame, we generate a random number, maybe using a computer or a lottery, and select units corresponding to this each number. So in this way, the simple random sample is drawn. Now the next method is systematic sampling. So in this systematic sampling also, the random sample principle is used. But here in this method, the sampling selection of a unit depends on the selection of a preceding unit in contrast to the simple random sampling. That means here a systematic way is used. So the first unit is selected randomly, and then every k item of the source list is selected, and which becomes the part of the sample. Now the value of k is determined by the total number of units in population divided by the number of units in sample. Now suppose here the first is to frame the sampling frame, and then we select a randomly a first number, like here we selected number 2, and then the every third unit in the population is selected or included in the sample. So this is how the systematic sampling is done. The next stage is, or the next method is, stratified sampling. Now, in case of stratified random sampling, the population is divided into certain groups known as strata or parts. And then from each stratum, an appropriate sample is drawn randomly. Now the number of strata depends on the degree of heterogeneity in the population under study, but these stratas, when divided, each strata are homogeneous among themselves with respect to certain characteristics of the population. Now here in this diagram you can see that each strata is divided accordingly. In each strata the population have some basic characteristics, and now the stratas could be divided on the basis of, you can say, age, or even on the basis of income level of a population. Suppose if we divide the number of households according to the income levels, say for example the higher income group, the middle income group, or the lower income group, and after that when we select the sample, this is how stratified sampling is done. Now the another type of sampling is the cluster sampling. In cluster sampling, each sample unit is not individual unit but rather a cluster or a group. Suppose it can be a household containing 5 members constitute a sample unit. So the population is divided into mutually exclusive clusters, and collectively the similar clusters, a simple random sample is drawn. And this cluster sample can be one stage, two stage, or multi-stage sampling. And in this case you can see we can divide these clusters into, say for example, 2 units in this diagram. So in the cluster sample, again we subdivide the groups and each subgroup represented a population, and from there the sample is being drawn. Now next is area sampling. In case of area sampling, the clusters are divided on geographical basis in terms of area, and it suggests that primary sampling of geographical area, like a sample of a country, state, town, villages, blocks, societies, apartments, or other areas of discretion. So the people reside in a particular area are studied. Now the another sampling is the multi-stage sampling. Now in multi-stage sampling, the sampling is performed at more than one stage. And here, in the first stage, the units are selected by some random sample method or the systematic sampling. And again, in the second stage, some units are selected out of the previously selected units through some suitable method. Now in this multi-stage sampling, if you can see that we divided the whole country on the basis of states and then the basis of district, then on the basis of villages or cities or even household. Now suppose in the first stage we select some districts, say for 30 districts. And from these 30 districts in the second stage we select some cities, say for 5 cities from each 30 districts. And in the third stage we select 10 wards or the localities from each city. And then in the fourth stage, from each locality 50 households. So in this way the multi-stage sampling is done.